Hello, everybody. Welcome to the April Newsroom analysis. There were some incredibly interesting headlines that came out over the past month, and I want to spend some time talking about some of them with you here today. My name is Beck Griffin, and you're watching the Deep Dive Project. Before we get into the particulars, I do want to issue an advisory because of the topics that we are going to be discussing, the articles that we're going to be reading. This video and what we are going to be discussing may not be appropriate for all audiences, so viewer discretion is advised, and please keep your own mental health forefront at all times. In addition, I also like to put out this quick disclaimer at the top because people like to come in with all kinds of crazy assumptions and accusations about me and my motivations and who I am and why I'm here. I am not a journalist by background or trade, but I don't have to be to discuss matters of public concern, information that is publicly available on the World Wide Web, and that forms the bedrock of my research, along with informing my perspective by talking to people who have the firsthand experience with the subjects that I discuss here. So I always like to put that out. I'm not trying to present myself as like a journalist or like a traditional news media personality or anything like that. The Deep Dive Project is my venture in independent citizen journalism and research. It gives me an opportunity to share what I would be learning about regardless if I had a place to share it. And my goal is to equip people with information and a desire to learn more, because we are fortunate enough right now to have the world at our fingertips with the answers to our deepest questions often no further than a couple of internet queries away. And although I am not here to alarm or fearmonger or anything like that, it is not hyperbole to say that ignorance is a luxury that we and billions of innocent people simply can no longer afford. So that is some of the motivation for why I am here, and you can learn more about the many nuances of what has kept me down, the many rabbit holes that I've found myself down over on my channel. And if you are not already, I hope that you will consider subscribing, and of course give this video a thumbs up, and I hope you'll let me know what you think about the topics that we are going to be discussing today, because they are interesting. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get to it. I don't want to dilly-dally too long because we have quite a bit to discuss. So this first article, I believe, is translated from Polish. I pull from news articles from all around the world and I translate them to English using a web translator like built in on my browser. Sometimes the translation isn't flawless, but we make do because I think it's really important to inform our perspective with information from around the world rather than just one or two places. I don't just pull from English-speaking news sites, and I think that that has honestly helped me form a much more nuanced and complete picture of the world. But like I said, the translation is not always perfect. Sometimes things are a little wonky, so just bear with me as we make our way through, and all apologies in advance for any mispronunciations of proper nouns. I do my best, but I'm not perfect. So this first article was published on April 5th, and the headline says, "The girls were told that if they didn't agree, their families would go to hell. Secrets of the Opus Dei Center in Argentina." The subheading says, "The house in Buenos Aires to which the, quote, when the demons awaken, end quote, film crew was invited was for years considered one of the main centers of Opus Dei's ruthless practices of enslaving people and forcing them to do work." And here there's a picture of investigative journalist Gareth Gore, and then a street view of Buenos Aires. I don't believe this is the building that they are referring to in this article, but I'm going to switch over to reader view just because this page is only happy if it is like expanded all the way and taking up everything, and that just simply is not an option. So I'm going to switch to reader view. They write, "We present an excerpt from Gareth Gore's book, Opus Dei, Dirty Money, Human Trafficking, and the Far-Right Church Organization with the publisher's permission." I've noticed that the exact title of Gareth Gore's book changes a little bit depending on the translation and everything. My copy says Opus, the Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church. I've seen it under like a couple of different kind of variations of the same name. But they're talking about Opus, which is an incredible book. I was fortunate enough to interview Gareth Gore about the book and his research and everything that he learned about Opus Dei. And that interview is, of course, over on the channel. So you should go and listen to it if you haven't, because it was a great conversation. And also, I feel like one of the most common interactions that I have with people in the comment section are either people telling me in the comment section that I need to read Opus, or me telling other people that they need to read Opus. I have read Opus. I am going to be re-listening to it again on audiobook at some point this year whenever I get through what I am reading right now. It's an incredible book. It's so informative. I've been using it for research that I have been doing here recently for a deep dive that'll be coming out in the not too distant future, and it's such a valuable resource. And yeah, if you haven't read it, you really need to, because it is excellent. And here, this will give you a taste of it. This is an excerpt in this article. Among the cast and crew members accompanying the renowned director to the press conference for the premiere of his new film were 3 unexpected figures: an Opus Dei priest and 2 supernumerary lawyers, lay members of Opus Dei. Their presence that day could be interpreted as a testament to the organization's hubris, but also as evidence of the vast resources at its disposal. Roland Hofe, director of the films The Killing Fields and The Mission, which earned Oscar nominations for Best Director in the 1980s, came out of a sort of retirement after 2 decades of making a film about Escriva. The production budget was set at $40 million. For Villatavere, it was to fulfill a long-time dream of portraying the organization's founder on the silver screen. Del Portillo sent his representative to Hollywood in the 1990s to establish a company there. His successor, Echevarria, saw a film about Padre Pio and had been obsessed with promoting a similar commemoration of Escriva ever since. The issue gained further attention after the release of the Da Vinci Code, in which Opus Dei is one of the main characters. A company called The Work LLC was registered in California, and a script was commissioned under the working title The Founder. However, the script was not well received. Hugh Hudson, who directed Chariots of Fire, said it smacks of Franco. And this is a painting of the man, the myth, Jose Maria Escriva himself. I think this was up in Rome when he was canonized. I've seen this picture before, and I'm 99.9% sure it's from when he was canonized in Rome, which was quite a hullabaloo, of course. Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu, known for his work on 21 Grams in Babel, rejected the offer without hesitation. Hofe initially refused, but then he viewed old footage and concluded that Escriva was a fascinating character. He really is. Ultimately, the script was changed, and funding for the production magically appeared thanks to 2 Spanish supernumeraries and a mysterious Spanish foundation, which those working on the film referred to as the, quote, golden investor. During the press conference, Hofe waxed poetic about When the Demons Awaken, the film's eventual title, as a sweeping drama about passion, betrayal, love, and religion. Between filming sessions, members of the film crew, accompanied by Opus Dei security, visited the Numerary's house in the Argentine capital. These invitations could be interpreted as a show of courage on the part of an organization that had previously kept its presence to itself. This change of policy was consistent with the organization's success in the face of the crisis surrounding the Da Vinci Code. The Buenos Aires house, to which the film crew was now being invited, had for years been considered one of the main centers of Opus Dei's ruthless practices of enslavement and forced labor. The magnificent property had, in fact, then been donated to the organization by the military junta in 1972, confirming its warm ties to the brutal military leaders who soon led to the disappearance of tens of thousands of people across the country. In reality, these people were first tortured in illegal detention centers and then thrown, battered, and drugged from military planes into the Atlantic Ocean. That is bleak. And if what is written here is to be believed, there is an Opus Dei thread running through this entire situation, which is not news to anyone who has done the research and looked into where this organization has popped up throughout history. It's research that I myself have done. I have a very old video on my channel that I did specifically about Opus Dei in Latin America or South America, and the numerous coups and military conflicts that have happened in Latin America that have Opus Dei footprints all around and through them. It's really really, really disturbing and kind of like impossible to ignore once you start looking. It pops up very, very readily. And I cannot imagine the like horror of being rounded up by your government, put into a detention center, tortured, and then disposed of. And the really horrifying part of it, just to bring everything full center and like to where we are currently, that's happening here in this country, my country, right now. They are like detaining people unlawfully, and if what is being reported is to be believed, they are treating these people horrifically. It's beyond the pale. And this kind of thing is a tale of as old as time with authoritarian regimes, is it not? In the house where numeraries and students lived, recruitment was a breeze. The men met every morning and evening for communal prayer in the large chapel on the ground floor, where Escriva gazed down at them from the stained glass window. Nearby, in a house connected to the residence of an underground tunnel, lived 60 women who were pursuing their vocation as auxiliary numeraries. Some claimed to have joined the organization as young as 12. 14 and a half is usually the age that people say, if they will even admit that they were like targeted and groomed for recruitment into this organization. It's usually around the age of 14 and a half, but I've heard about it happening much, much younger. They are talking about, this excerpt from Gareth Gore's book is talking about it happening to people who are much, much younger. These are babies. These are not people, they're not even fully fledged people yet. They're not capable of exercising true informed consent about serious decisions like lifelong celibacy and commitment to an organization that allegedly is not being upfront about what is going to be expected and what your quality of life will actually be like once you're on the inside. Makes me so mad. They came from poor communities in northern Argentina, Paraguay, or Bolivia. Numeraries who traveled the area seeking vocations and promised the girls a better life in Buenos Aires at a hotel management school encouraged them to join. Their task was to identify suitable candidates and persuade them to cooperate. One girl claimed to have been flown to Buenos Aires on a government plane. Others recalled that a numerary from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs ensured their smooth crossing of the border. So now we're talking, this is literally what's being described here, what's being alleged, is literally human trafficking, moving people across borders by rather like unconventional means. We're talking about people being transferred on government planes, how people in government positions who are, in this case, we're talking about someone who's working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is sort of greasing the skids, doing things on the inside to facilitate the movement of people. That is abuse of a position and an abuse of a power that should incur, if true, if factual, should incur serious consequences, serious legal consequences. The girls were convinced that they had been called to join Opus Dei. I wonder who told them that. And that if they accepted, their families would be rewarded in heaven. And if they refused, they would be punished in hell. The carrot and the stick. The carrot and the stick. Paradoxically, it was precisely the representatives of this seemingly weakest social group who at one point posed the greatest and most existential threat to Opus Dei. I have referred to these women and girls as Opus Dei's canaries in the coal mine. Because how did they know that the air in the coal mine was toxic? How did they know that the environment was dangerous? How did they know that they needed to get out when the canaries that they carried down with them keeled over and died? That's why they had them, in case you didn't know, or you didn't know where that expression came from. Back in the day, when men used to go underground to mine, I mean, they still do. But back in the day, they would take canaries down with them. And the canaries were there because they would succumb to toxic fumes and things much quicker than their human companions, giving the humans like an early warning system to get out if their birds keel over. And in a very similar fashion, I think, I feel like it's a fitting and apt metaphor to call assistant numeraries, these former assistant numeraries in particular, who are speaking out and talking about what they were forced to endure and the experiences that they had and the links to which they were pushed mentally and physically and spiritually and emotionally. I think it is apt to refer to them as Opus Dei's canaries in the coal mine, because their testimonies and their experiences allude to a undercurrent, a theme, a problem, a toxicity within the organization Opus Dei. And it would seem to me that an organization that is actually invested in the things that it claims to be invested in, making saints of everyday people living their lives in the world, yada yada, that they would be sincerely invested in correcting any type of internal toxicity that would be metaphorically and sadly, literally killing people off via stress, via mental health decline, via the very prevalent and obvious abuse of psychiatric medicine that it seems to exist in this organization. And stay tuned on that one, because I'm not done with that rabbit hole either, and I have more to say about that in the very near future. The women lived the life of slaves. Every day at 10 to 6, they were awakened by bells installed on each floor of the building. They were expected to immediately rise, kneel on the floor, and kiss the ground while uttering the Latin word servium, meaning I will serve. After their morning toilet, they put on their uniforms, which by that they mean like your morning routine, your shower and everything. Cold showers, by the way, for the women, always. Cold showers. After their morning toilet, they put on their uniforms, hurriedly drank coffee, and went to the chapel for prayers. At 6:10, they began working in the kitchen or cleaning their own apartments. At 7:40, they changed into more formal attire and went to the chapel, where prayers began at 8, preluding Mass and Communion. At 9:30, they ate breakfast, then changed again and headed to work. Just nonstop from the minute your eyes open in the morning to the minute they fall asleep at the end of the day. If you saw the very incredible Heroic Minute show docuseries that was released last year, I feel like they did such a good job of illustrating that in that show, what it's like for the members living in the centers, the like nonstop, just like you don't get a chance to even like pause to catch your breath and like take stock of your surroundings. And I have often wondered whether or not that isn't by design. This isn't a healthy environment. It doesn't behoove them to be giving these people that they're extracting all of these resources and free labor from too much time to reflect on what is being done to them. And so they keep it busy intentionally. I don't know why the rest of this isn't translating. I can translate it manually, though, and read it to you. The men lived next door, but the two houses were separated by double doors. At this time of day, the women hurried through the tunnel to clean the rooms, bathrooms, and common areas reserved for the men. This was how they passed the time until the midday meal. After eating and a half-hour break, they cleaned the auditorium, then changed for the rosary and the daily discussion on faith and recruitment opportunities. Of course. With Opus Dei, it's never just going to be about living a prayerful life and treating your work in front of you as your vocation, because there's this added layer of the constant need for expansion, practically, it seems, at all costs. And so, of course, there must be a discussion about recruitment opportunities. At 3 in the afternoon, they returned to the chapel to sing the praeses together, a special set of daily prayers compiled by the founder. They spent the next hour and a half working in the laundry or ironing room. At 5 o'clock, there was a coffee break, followed by free time for confession or study. If the superior approved, they also visited the candidates or auxiliary numeraries, although these outings were rarely made alone. Next paragraph. And this is what I was saying, how sometimes the translation isn't the best, but we persist. Dinner was eaten at 8 o'clock, which is late, in my opinion. Well, maybe not for European culture, though. And this is a Spanish organization. I know that they typically have their last meal of the day pretty late in the evening. They call it tapas. So it's probably not unusual for European people or for Spaniards. If you're in the United States, though, 8 o'clock dinner is late. After which the women returned to their rooms to change into their work clothes and serve the men. Again, their lives revolve around these men that they're not even allowed to talk to. Oh, but some were allowed to some were allowed contact with men at this time, but they were bound by strict rules of conduct, particularly the prohibition against raising their eyes. So you can't even look each other in the eye, which is crazy. After the meal was over and everything was cleared away, the women gathered for a 15-minute group conversation, then retired to chapel and then to bed at 10 o'clock. They led an arduous life of hard work, precisely in line with the visions of the founder of Opus Dei. Exploitation, abuse of power, and deprivation of basic rights were presented to them as sacrifice to God. However, the biographical film being shot across town made no mention of their daily reality. Of course not. Opus Dei has been accused of engaging in like hagiographical, revisionist history, basically, when it comes to talking about the true personality of their founder, Jose Maria Escriva, and the reality of life in Opus Dei, and all of these other things as well. So the next paragraph here says, the women faced enormous pressure to complete their assigned tasks, not least because of the number of shirts they had to iron and bathrooms they had to clean. They had no free time and little time for themselves. Given this situation, it's hardly surprising that some attempted suicide. And what did I just freaking say? What did I just say a minute ago about the impact that this environment seems to have on people and how it's causing like lasting emotional, mental, physical, spiritual harm, and all the way up to attempted suicides. It's right here in the black and white. Many could only hope for any sign of Christian compassion from the priest who celebrated Mass and heard confessions. But did they get any compassion, or was what they told their confessor just taken and run with? Danilo Eterovic, so sorry about that, for he was the one we are talking about, often turned a blind eye to minor infractions of Opus Dei's rule, which other superiors scrupulously enforced. One of the auxiliary numeraries wanted to borrow a book she had noticed on a shelf in the men's house. She was denied permission because the text was deemed inappropriate for someone of her status. That's the other thing about Opus Dei, is that for all protestations to the contrary, it seems very apparent to me that there is a hierarchical and classist attitude that is alive and well inculcated and, dare I say, nurtured in Opus Dei. This classist, elitist, looking down your nose at people of a lower status than you. It's absolutely disgusting, very Victorian, and completely unnecessary, and note, should have no part to play in an organization that is supposed to be founded on Christian virtues. Yet here we are. So this woman who is denied access to this book because apparently she was of too low a status to be able to read it would be inappropriate for her. She took the book without permission, and when it came time to return it, she panicked. She confessed her sin to Father Danilo, who offered to do it for her, a display of uncharacteristic mercy for that house. Shortly thereafter, the priest was released from all duties to Opus Dei members, and sometime later, his body was found nearby the railway tracks, along with a letter asking the police to notify the organization of his suicide. Police went to Opus Dei headquarters, but officers were informed that no Father Danilo had ever lived there and that no one had ever heard of him. What? The lives of the auxiliary numeraries and life in Opus Dei in general remained a mystery to the actors and crew members who were working nearby on a biopic about Escriva. It would be another decade before the truth finally emerged. Oh my gosh. See, this is why I need to re-listen to Opus, because there are so many little details and things that just get lost because it is such a hefty book. There's so much information. So this priest, who they're saying returned this book for this numerary assistant who was afraid to return it because she wasn't supposed to have it because she was not of the right status to be able to read this book. After that, After he went and did this, ostensibly did this for her, at some point he turns up dead on the railroad tracks with a note saying that it was a suicide. That's some like mafia level weirdness right there. And look, it might not have anything to do with the book. We have no idea what else was going on, right? Like, as members of the public reading this now, we have no way of knowing like what was going on behind the scenes at this point in time at this Opus Dei center, like, or with Opus Dei in the country of Argentina, more broadly speaking. So there may be some context that would make all of this make a lot more sense if we had it. I don't know. The way this is written certainly makes it seem like he turned up dead after having returned this book, as if in retaliation for showing mercy. Again, I have no way of knowing if that is actually the case. Knowing what I know about the organization, it makes a lot more sense to me that the reason had to do with something else, something socio-political, perhaps. Regardless, terrible and an absolute tragedy. It definitely doesn't give me the warm fuzzies. Translating this next section here, they've got some quotes here. And they say, after completing the Argentinian filming of When the Demons Awaken, the crew returned to Europe. Post-production lasted over a year, but the day of the international premiere finally arrived. It ended in a complete flop. Amidst the somber pomp, it's hard to see, and this is one of the quotes, even a glimmer of emotional or spiritual life in this film. There's only pompous posturing, said the New York Times reviewer who assessed the film as disastrous and flattering. And then this next set of quotes, let's see. They say, When the Demons Awaken is a picture, this is another quote, is a picture detached from physicality, saturated with empty words, and identifying devotion with faith. The commentator from Village Voice did not spare any criticism. Haffe's incomprehensible delight in mawkish Catholic mysticism makes watching When the Demons Awaken a greater torment than saying 100 Hail Marys. So they were not fans of this film. And what a bummer for Opus Dei, right? And how ironic. Isn't it ironic that all of this stuff was happening next to this film getting made? And it is absolutely depraved and inhumane. And the film is called When Demons Awaken. It's like, is it a self-tell? It's very unfortunate, regardless. I feel like it's a little bit of a self-tell. This next paragraph says, Opus Dei did everything it could to salvage Escriva's reputation, as they continue to do present day, and present him to the world as the embodiment of holiness. Joaquin Navarro Valls, a numerary and longtime spokesman for John Paul II, solemnly declared that almost daily thanks poured into Villa Tavere from divorcees whose film inspired them to rebuild their marital bonds, from parents and children who reconciled after years, and finally from various others who rediscovered their lost faith. I am so sure. It's like, sure, Jan. The production's final results did not bear this out. Almost the entire $40 million budget was wasted. That's a lot of money. The film grossed a mere $4 million worldwide. In the Vatican, Opus Dei became the subject of ridicule and jokes. One of the jokes went, quote, "The demons may awaken, but there will certainly be no Oscars." Ouch. So anyway, I thought that that was a good excerpt. I wanted to read that. Please read Opus, listen to Opus if you have not up to this point, and check out my interview with Gareth Gore if you haven't already. Moving right along, this is just a little update. I've been talking about the situation with the Catholic Society of St. Pius X, which is kind of it's a rad trad kind of Catholic organization that has been accused of and being schismatic, has had schismatic problems in its past, and who is probably now at this very moment hurtling towards schism, once again undoing progress that was made back in like the 80s or 90s with this organization. It's a whole thing. If you want to catch up on all of the previous conversation to this, you can find it in previous newsroom analyses. This is just a quick little update. I want to kind of keep my finger on the pulse with this situation, but just because I think it's really interesting. And this is like quintessential Catholic infighting as well, which I also think is incredibly interesting. And the report here says Vatican preparing for aftermath of SSPX consecration. So the latest tea has been that the SSPX wants to consecrate their own bishops, and the Vatican, the Pope, has said no, and they are saying, well, we're going to do it anyway, and if they do that, then they will be in schism because they'll be going against what the Vatican told them to do. It's a whole thing. And this here says that Cardinal Victor Emmanuel Fernandez has prepared a declaration of schism should the Society of St. Pius X proceed with its episcopal consecrations in Econe on July 1st. The Vatican is also making pastoral arrangements to welcome those who may leave the SSPX after it ordains new bishops without papal permission. Because, of course, for a Catholic organization, for a faction or a group of the body of Christ, of the Catholic Church, to be declared schismatic means they're no longer a part of the whole. This is similar to, you know, like the Calvinists or the Lutherans, or, you know, pick any Protestant diversion from Catholicism. That means that you're no longer a part of the Catholic Church. And so, of course, they have to have it out there for anyone who's going to want to stay true to the magisterium of the Catholic Church, to basically have somewhere to go, like spiritual migrants, practically, whenever this organization does what it fully intends to do and ordains these bishops. So it's fascinating. It's really interesting. This organization is wild. I have a little bit of firsthand experience with it from many years ago, growing up in the American Midwest in conservative traditional Catholicism. At least one, if not more, of the traditional Latin Mass churches that my family went to were either SSPX or had a strong SSPX presence. I actually learned about SSPX and like the Legion of Christ long before I ever heard of Opus Dei, just because they were the presence in this particular region of the Midwest here in the United States. So it's an interesting history. If you have any firsthand experience with the SSPX, sound off. I'd be so curious to know, if you've been following this, what your thoughts are with it as well. Because again, it's fascinating. Moving right along, we have a new book alert. Please go and support if you are able. It is called La Obra. It is written by Marina Pereda. It is, as of now, only available in Spanish, so I understand North American listeners, English speakers, are probably not going to be as excited about this. But if you are able and you care to, please consider buying a copy of the book to support Marina and to support victim survivors telling their stories just in general. I have ordered my copy and it'll be showing up at some point, but Marina was kind enough to actually send me a PDF version of her book, which has been amazing. I've been going through and translating the chapters. I've started sharing excerpts over on the Deep Dive Project's Instagram page. It is an incredible book. Marina is an incredible writer. The way that she talks about the experience of growing up as a girl, and most specifically growing up as a girl within a very rigid, authoritarian, conservative, religious environment, is just, she puts the experience into words in a way that I struggle to consistently. And I have nothing but good things to say about this book. Please go and support her if you can, and let me read you this article about her book and about what prompted her to write it. This is from El Diario. The headline says, within Opus Dei since the age of 14. Quote, they don't put a gun to your head, but the manipulation is constant. Marina Pereda was a member of the organization founded by Escriva de Balaguer for a decade, an experience she now recounts in first person in La Obra, a book in which she details the complex machinery of pressures that operates within and which, in her case, had an effect from a very young age. And here she is. She's an absolute doll. And I'm so happy that she decided to write her story, because it is one that deserves to be told. For a whole decade, the sound of the alarm clock signaled the start of Marina Pereda's great daily battle. Known as the Heroic Minute, it's the first of the practices consecrated to God that celibate members of Opus Dei must perform at the start of the day. Getting up as soon as the alarm rings, quickly, without hesitation, without dawdling or waiting a minute longer. A spiritual requirement that, for those who aren't early risers like her, was a source of constant anxiety and guilt. Afterward would come the cold shower, what I say about the cold showers earlier, and perhaps foregoing the sugar in her breakfast coffee. If it wasn't Sunday, it might be time to place the cilice around her thigh for 2 hours, one more sacrifice for God. And of course, the cilice is the spiked chain that Opus Dei members wear as part of their corporal mortification. These are some of the so-called daily mortifications that celibate members of Opus Dei, work of God in Latin, routinely apply to themselves as a way of fulfilling their divine mission of becoming holier and more disciplined under the premise that great physical or psychological suffering, quote-unquote, sanctifies the world. This is not an empty threat. These are some of the established practices that Marina Pereda witnessed and experienced firsthand during the 10 years that she spent in the organization. Founded in 1928 by Jose Maria Escriva de Balaguer, and she now recounts in her book La Obra, which was published this Thursday. So this article was published April 10th. So it was published that and released that previous Thursday. So you can find it now, pre-order it, order it. Through her own experience and with a healthy dose of irony, Marina describes how the order operates from within, transformed in 1982 by Pope John Paul II, the same pope who canonized its founder, into the only personal prelature of the Catholic Church. Quote, before I read that, I have heard rumors, I have read things in some of the research that I've done, that there are other organizations, Catholic organizations out there that technically meet the requirements of being a personal prelature, but they just don't have the title. There are a couple in like Latin America specifically that I'm thinking, I can't think of the names right now off the top of my head, but just an interesting thing that I wanted to throw out there. I've had people fight me on that before because I've said that Opus Dei is like the Catholic Church's most well-known personal prelature. Technically, they're the only personal prelature, but there are other organizations that are structured very similarly, which I think is really interesting. Anyway, there's this quote here. I would like it to help someone unfamiliar with it understand the structure behind it. We are not isolated cases, notes the author, who metaphorically likens the institution to a vast theatrical set with members obligated to play a seemingly simple role, that of holiness in everyday life, which can ultimately become a suffocating mask. Born in Miranda de Ebro, Burgos, into a large family of 7 children whose parents are members of Opus Dei, Marina was never untouched by its dynamics and from a young age began attending the club in Vitoria where Opus Dei organizes activities regularly. Quote, the clubs are officially cultural associations, always segregated by sex, where they do dance, theater, cooking, in principle, non-religious activities, but between one thing and another, they start suggesting a talk with the priest, a confession. They insist on whether you pray. Why don't you pray a little more? Whether you ask Escriva for miracles. That's how it becomes normalized, explained Marina, who in 2025 was one of the protagonists of the HBO documentary, The Heroic Minute, which exposes the internal dynamics of Opus Dei through 13 testimonials. Clubs, along with schools, training centers, and foundations, are some of the entry points. It's common for regular members to be pressured to bring other friends along. Recruitment sounds harsh, but it's a constant atmosphere. Sometimes they're just trying to create a good image, trying to get them to attend some leisure activity or a parent event like a talk with a prestigious figure, explains Marina. These clubs are usually the residents of the numeraries who organize the activities, practice sexual abstinence, and dedicate their lives to the organization. Supernumeraries can marry and have children. Throughout the book, divided into acts emulating a play, Marina explains what she defines as the carefully orchestrated mechanism of pressures that influenced her decision to request admission to Opus Dei at the age of 14 and a half. It happened during Holy Week in 2004 at a camp with 40 other girls between the ages of 13 and 16, all potential candidates, so hopeful recruits for Opus Dei's machine. Marina had previously attended a retreat where she was to reflect on, quote, what God was asking of me, end quote. And we all know what that means, right? Because nobody has ever heard of having a vocation to Opus Dei until they're informed of it, it seems. And the numeraries and the priest, through conversations and private talks, had already been guiding the young woman toward the option of becoming a numerary, a category considered a total and superior commitment. The woman, now 36, remembers the letter she had to write to apply for admission as a candidate, but in practice, from that day forward, she began incorporating the dynamics and customs of a member into her daily life. Quote, "They called us associates in the organization's terminology, but we all considered ourselves numeraries," she says. The pressure and discomfort always coexisted with the promise of salvation and the instilled belief that she was accepting God's plan until at 16, during her first 15-day retreat for those who had applied, she expressed her doubts to the director. The response wasn't, "Relax, you're very young, think about it," but rather, she tried to convince me that I could become an associate, she notes, which is another category of membership. In practice, associates like numeraries, but without the obligation to live in a center with other members. This was the status Marina maintained until she left the institution in 2013 at the age of 24. The entire process was marked by an atmosphere in which she couldn't back down, as she describes in the book, an atmosphere that took its toll on her, a very religious and obedient girl. If she said no, she felt she was doing something wrong, being rebellious and arrogant, as she had already been taught. The director had no doubts about my vocation to celibacy, and if I gave in now, I would be saying no to God, which is what the fallen angel had done, she recounts. And remember what I said earlier about how people underage, people with brains that are not fully formed, are simply incapable of engaging and practicing true informed consent. Like, there is zero chance in Marina's situation that the choice to participate or not in this Opus Dei thing was never really a choice at all. It was a carrot with a stick. It's always a carrot with a stick. And the option to back down is apparently never there. The demand is to give more and more and more and more. And if you become resistant to that, if you begin to put boundaries in place, if you begin to step back and see the forest for the trees, you will be accused of having bad spirit. Because in Opus Dei, the problems are never the result of the environment that has been created in this organization, never the result of the extremely narrow and misogynistic writings and teachings of their founder, never the result of this omerta of complete and total silence and control that seems to be exerted over people's lives. No. It's never any of those things. It's your fault for failing. And that is all put on the individual. And can you imagine the impact that that would have on somebody who is still a child? You barely have any understanding of the world yet, certainly no understanding of yourself. I mean, you aren't even you're a half-baked human at this point in time. And your life, your potential, your gifts, your attributes end up being subverted and hijacked by this system. It is so exploitative. It is so obviously exploitative and harmful that it baffles the mind how anyone could look at this information and not go, yeah, objectively, we've got a problem here. If this was a political outfit that was recruiting children, like some sort of like Hitler Youth, to mobilize them for some sort of nationalistic purpose, oh my God, the outcry, people would be in the streets. But when it's a religious context, religious people who, in many other cases, would be the first to say, whoa, this isn't good, all of a sudden are much more trusting. And why could that be? Could it be because these people are placed in an environment where you can't back down, and where the atmosphere is such that you must conform or it is absolute torture? And then also you factor in the interpersonal and professional entanglements that often come in because of the fact that this organization is so enmeshed in every single aspect of society. People get so incredibly tangled up that they can never fully get out. And even if they do get out, they very often cannot speak out about the things that they experienced because of the wrath that they would incur, the negative backlash that they would have inflicted upon them and their families, perhaps their careers, all that they hold dear, by the other people in this organization. Because once you stray from the groupthink, once you display that bad spirit, now you are an enemy of the state, practically. The modus operandi she experienced, which she has compared with that of dozens of former members, she describes as a process of constant manipulation. They don't put a gun to your head, there's no need for that, but there is psychological pressure, she points out. Over time, she has realized that from the beginning, she experienced a conditioning of freedom and a filtering of information that guided her every step of the way. What did I just say? They don't tell you, look, these are the options, or you'll see, but rather they insist that you have been called to this, and supposedly you have to understand the rules as you follow them, because that will bring you closer to God. And of course, if you don't, you will be dooming yourself and your family and all of your loved ones to eternal damnation in hell. The carrot and the stick. When asked about these practices, Opus Dei's communication office responded that it deeply respects every person's experience and refers to the channels of dialogue opened in recent years to listen to former members. Sure, you're listening, but are you actually internalizing what you're hearing? Is there any critical thought happening in the background as you're listening to this information? And oh, by the way, can anyone point me to anything that has been implemented for these former members that is anything more substantial than a fucking email address? Somebody's email address. Sure, send us your complaints and your worries to this. We'll take care of you. Yeah, sure. Haven't seen proof positive of it yet. I could be proven wrong. I'd be happy to be proven wrong, but I haven't seen it. As a member of the public, I don't have access to that information. And it seems to me that quite a few former members don't either. And that's a problem, friends. Furthermore, the response includes a link to an interview with Lydia Villa, who works as the head of youth activities at the Regional Advisory Office of Opus Dei in Spain. In the text, Villa states that the process of vocational discernment is gradual and long, with several milestones, so that only those who freely wish to join can do so after several years. The interview emphasizes that admission can be requested from the age of 16 and a half, after which the discernment process can continue. It also acknowledges that at 14 and a half, there are aspirant girls and boys who sense a call from God to belong to the Opus Dei as celibate persons, but who cannot yet do so. In these cases, the work acknowledges this desire and accompanies this process according to their age. I think you're full of fucking shit, and I don't believe you. I don't believe you. Show me the proof. I don't believe you. The environment that is being described and has been exemplified, illustrated, exposed time and time and time again from numerous former members with firsthand experience, right? These aren't tabloids just running with crazy theories. These are people with firsthand knowledge. Doesn't seem like there is ever an opportunity for these people to authentically engage with true informed consent in the decisions that they make when it comes to interacting with this organization in any way, shape, or form. I don't believe them. I don't believe them at all. I think they're lying. That's my opinion. I'm not making any accusations because obviously I can't verify any of this. I'm not on the inside of this organization. All I have to go off of is statements that are made, articles that are written, and God bless the many, many former members who take the time to write about their experiences on places like Opus Dei Exposed and Opus Libris and in books like La Obra. Otherwise, we would have no way of knowing because this organization clearly is not going to be forthcoming. and only make statements, only have something to say when they are backed into such a corner that they have no other option, where the optics would be so tremendously bad that they have to. That's the only time. And methinks they doth protest too much. Throughout the book, the former Opus Dei member details the influence she believes the priests and spiritual directors she had during her ordeal had on her, defining these figures as key tools within a structure that allows them to forge a forced trust with girls and young women, ultimately becoming their vital and spiritual confidants. At one point, Marina recounts how she would tell them all her secrets after they asked her about her friends, her relationship with her family, her prayers and mortifications, or whether she liked any boys. One of the first guidelines was to avoid associating with men her own age. Quote, I was forbidden from looking at boys or being friends with them. I would occasionally go out partying with friends, but I felt very strange, and little by little you start incorporating elements of social distancing, she explains. She also recounts how she had to review the films and books she wanted to watch or read to avoid temptations or ideas that could jeopardize her faith and commitment, although cinema was always an escape for her, a place to imagine herself and reconnect with the world beyond the organization. And can I just say once again how incredibly ironic I find it that Opus Dei claims to be an organization that is in the world, where people live their lives as their vocations, and yet apparently people are, their faith and their beliefs are so flimsy, such flim-flam, that they have to screen and censor anything from the outside world that they interact with. This is an organization, ladies and gentlemen, that is out in the world, but their members can't watch like mainstream films. They can't make those decisions for themselves. They have to go through their chain of command, as it were, for that. Numerous articles talk about how the Daily Mail undercover investigation talked about how these women and girls can only watch certain approved films that are like rated U, universal, or like G for general audiences, like kid stuff, basically. Everybody's so worried about these temptations and ideas that could jeopardize their faith. For an organization that's supposed to be in the middle of the world, it doesn't seem like they can deal with the world very well at all. In fact, far from being an organization that is in the world, it seems very isolationist. Although her status as an associate member didn't require her to live in an Opus Dei residence, Marina eventually moved to a study and work center in Bilbao when she was almost 16. She wasn't keen on the idea. She didn't want to leave her hometown of Miranda or her family. However, under the pretext that her vocation was threatened in her city due to the bad influences at the public high school she attended and the lack of Opus Dei centers there, she finally agreed. They had to get her somewhere where they could exert more control over her. Why? Because if she continues to kind of straddle the fence in between this very strange Opus Dei world and everybody else, chances are really good that at some point she's going to be able to step back and look at the forest for the trees. What do you know? Eventually she did. Not after they had extracted 10 years of her life from her, unfortunately, but she did. And it said earlier that she left when she was 24. Isn't it interesting how in Opus Dei, you can find references to this. It's in Opus. Former members talk about it all the time. How in the very earliest days in the writings of the founder, Jose Maria Escriva, he talked about how not to go after for recruitment. He would tell people not to go after people who are over the age of 25 because they're too set in their ways. You want to know about the age when your brain gets done cooking? When you're fully developed? It's about 25, 24, 25, 23. Depends on the person. Right about in there. When did Marina leave? When she was 24. This organization knows exactly what it is doing. And why. And it's very obvious. In exchange for living at the center, she worked alongside the auxiliary numeraries, women of Opus Dei dedicated to domestic tasks, cleaning rooms and cooking for an adjacent men's residence. Later, she would teach theater classes and supervise the study rooms for the girls who regularly attended the center. Almost 10 years after leaving Opus Dei and following the complaint filed by 44 women that prompted an investigation in Argentina into human trafficking and forced labor against the institution's highest authorities in the country, Marina took advantage of the listening office opened by the organization, which she refers to in her response to this publication, to request a review of her employment history and point out that, during the time she worked there, she never signed anything. She tried twice, but according to her account and responses, it concluded that there was no employment relationship and that the only thing the young woman did at the center was help with household chores like any group of friends who live together and share the tasks, she explains. Which sounds like very like Opus Dei language. Everything for them is, oh, it's a family. There's this family attitude. We're all a part of a family here. This is your new family. You don't need to have relationships with your old family. Come and live with us here. Give us labor, and you won't mind giving us labor because that's what families do, right? Not good. Not good. If you are ever at a job, new job, you just started there, and you start hearing a whole lot about how now you're going to be a part of a family. Everybody there at your new job, they're all a part of a family. They really treat everyone like family there. Hey, maybe it'll be fine. Maybe it'll be a really great and positive experience. But be careful. Because in my personal experience, and I have some, when people say, we treat people like family, what that really means is we undervalue what you bring to the table and expect you to give more for free. That's what it actually means. The definitive step in the organization came on October 5th, 2012, with a milestone she calls fidelity, which in practice is a lifelong commitment, formalizing a kind of heavenly marriage, as Marina ironically and humorously describes it in the book. So Opus Dei members, they don't take vows in the traditional sense. They make these like promises and commitments, this fidelity and everything else. In my opinion, more of Jose Maria's reinvention of the wheel, but it's neither here nor there. Marina was almost 23 and had already graduated from the University of Navarra. During this time, she worked various jobs for the organization, such as cleaning university residences, for which she received money that all the numeraries and associates had to hand over to the director of their residence. The director then gave them enough to survive that month and pay their rent. Marina had just over a year left before she was due to leave the organization. She finally did so at Christmas 2013 after a difficult process that severely affected her mental health and after meeting a priest who recommended she see a psychologist. There was a lot of pressure to keep me from leaving. They asked me to talk to one person after another, told me to take some time, kept asking me if I was sure, and pushed me up the ranks to the head of the branch. When she asked me again if I was sure, I said yes, just like when I applied to join at 14, and back then they hadn't asked me nearly as many questions. Marina recounts her story without apparent anger or resentment. She still grapples with some of the lingering effects of her time in Opus Dei and has been a volunteer for several years with AFISE, an association that supports victims of cults and coercive groups. She hasn't named any of the people she encountered along the way who ultimately drew her in, and she avoids pointing fingers at individuals. Instead, she focuses on a structure that transformed her into something that she wasn't, and on a society that, she believes, hasn't fully recognized its true nature. So that is Marina Pereda and her new book, La Obra. Please go and purchase it. Support her if you can. I have a link to buy it on Amazon over on my website, or you can probably order it through your bookseller of choice. Or if you don't want to do that, you don't have the funds, see about requesting it through your local public library, through like interlibrary loan. Also, libraries will buy books if there's like an interest, if people are interested. So don't forget about them. Please support people writing their stories and sharing their experiences, because this is so incredibly important. Moving on, this is a tone shift. We're going to talk about a different organization for a minute. This is Why Does the Legion of Christ Continue to Have So Many Followers in Mexico? This was published on April 9th. And as I'm sitting here, I'm realizing I forgot to plug my camera in. Give me just a second. I need to plug my camera in. Oh yeah, we would not have made it I did not do that. So this is out of Mexico, talking about the Legion of Christ, which is an organization that I have discussed in the past. I have a standalone deep dive episode if you are interested in learning more, if you don't know a whole lot. But this says, as someone who grew up in a conservative Mexican Catholic family, attended an all-girls Catholic school, and whose social circle was mostly made up of individuals who also attended Catholic schools, I'm very aware of the scandal surrounding Father Marcial Maciel, the late founder of the Legion of Christ. That's why I wondered why so many people still trust the legionaries with their children's education. You and me both, sister. The Legion of Christ was founded by Maciel in Mexico City in 1941. Over time, it grew into an international organization spanning over 70 private schools across 19 countries, with 50 schools in Mexico alone. Instead of calling them the Legionarios de Cristo, their detractors would call them the Millonarios de Cristo, Millionaires of Christ, as Maciel built a charismatic reputation, creating close ties to wealthy families within conservative Catholic circles. However, Maciel's legacy was overshadowed by numerous accusations of sexual abuse against minors, as well as revelations of different identities, secret marriages, and even children of his own. He was never prosecuted in Mexico, nor in any of the countries where his organization operated. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world where predators face no punishment, no matter their crime. Isn't that fun? Instead, the Vatican ordered him to step down as a leader of the Legion of Christ in 2005 and withdraw from public ministry, quote, into a life of prayer and penitence, during which time he died at the age of 86 in Florida. May he rot in hell. And yet, despite years of scandal, the 51 private schools run by the Legion of Christ in Mexico have not only survived, but continue to thrive. I witnessed this phenomenon firsthand while attending a Christmas festival organized by one of these schools in Guadalajara last December. As I sat there among family members and hundreds of parents proudly watching their kids perform, I couldn't help but wonder why so many families are attracted to the legionaries. So I asked people in my circle who decided to enroll their children in these schools why they did it. 2 moms agreed to speak to me about the matter. Quote, it was very important for me that my children attended a Catholic school. Sofia Rosas, who's originally from Guadalajara but has lived in Monterrey for over a decade because her husband is from there, told me. It was also very important for us to find like-minded families and a like-minded community, which I can appreciate all of those things. What parent has not had similar values and similar priorities for their own children? Unfortunately, predators know that, and they are adept at finding the loopholes and the spots, the lapses in our system of protection of vulnerable people in society, and they exploit them. And that is an issue because, unfortunately, the Legionaries of Christ have a history of exactly that. Rosas said that her husband and everyone in her husband's family attended a Legion of Christ school in Monterrey, so it made sense to continue within that social circle. But the main reason, she says, is the opportunity the school gives them to get involved in their children's lives. The school makes a lot of effort to integrate families. Parents are extremely involved in the school, and that's what my husband and I wanted. I mean, we want to know who our kids befriend and who the families of those children are, she said. For Rosas, the scandal was never a factor in their decision. And I think that that is the case for a lot of people across the board, across like organizations and religions. For some people, it simply is not going to matter what an organization has done, or what their government has done, their representatives have done. It's simply not going to matter, because for some people, many people perhaps, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but it really does seem like there are people who simply want to feel safe at any cost. No matter the cost, they want to feel safe, even if that means that they kind of have to lie to themselves, ignore what I have to imagine is some cognitive dissonance coming up, and engage in revisionist and fallacious historical reasoning. That's my perspective on it, and I have yet to really see anything that makes me think that it is anything else. And it's really, really sad, because the desire for people to just feel safe at any cost is, again, something that predators are aware of, and they will exploit. And as much as we would love to be able to think that these institutions and organizations have all of our best interests at heart and are operating from completely altruistic places, unfortunately, we also know the flip side of that coin. We've read the accounts from victim survivors. We've read the news articles, done the deep dive research. I've interviewed and talked to the people themselves. I don't really know how you get around that. I don't really know what you do when people are willing to completely ignore everything, reality, in order to feel comforted. Quote, I didn't know about the scandal. I attended a school run by the Opus Dei, so I wasn't aware of all the details. I'm sure you weren't. I am sure that in Opus Dei, when all of the shit hit the fan, they were not going around and like having circles for people to come in and like share their thoughts and feelings on the entire situation and to talk about why and how it could be that such a good and holy Catholic organization with such a good and holy founder could be wrapped up and actually responsible for so much atrocity. That wasn't happening. Like, I would bet all of the money in my savings account that that was not happening and has never happened. I knew he, Maciel, had been found to have a wife and kids, but it wasn't until I watched the HBO Max series on the life of Maciel that I found out about everything. But it doesn't change our decision. I'm extremely happy with the children, and so are I'm extremely happy with the school, sorry, and so are my children, she said. Meanwhile, a woman who asked only to be identified as Maria, a graduate from the Legion of Christ school in Guadalajara, told me that she and her husband had two schools in mind, a boys and girls school run by the Jesuits and a girls only and boys only school run by the Legion of Christ. They ultimately chose the school operated by the Legion of Christ because they considered it to have an outstanding level of English in addition to great academics. Academically, we knew that the schools excel in English compared to others. They also hold certifications that align with our intention of giving our children the best education available. And I cannot discount that at all. I understand how major of a priority that is for so many people. I mean, even growing up in the United States, I can remember growing up, it was pretty common knowledge that, like, you know, you could get a passing education in a public school. But a really good education, if you wanted a good one, would be in like a Catholic school, which were, of course, always expensive and often out of the budget and even the wallet of a lot of these families who would want to send their children to these places. But like, typically these schools are perceived as being better, having better educational standards, more rigorous academics, and I understand why parents want those things for their kids. What good parent wouldn't? So in this case, all I can really say is that I hope, because these parents are saying they were attracted to these schools so much because of the curricula, but also because of how much the school wants to work with the parents in the raising of their children, I hope that parents are authentically like engaging with these schools and the like environment that their children are being raised in, and are looking and paying very close attention to how things are being done, rather than just blindly trusting because it's this famous Catholic organization that has you know, you can look and find people saying good things about it if you want to, that they don't need to like look any closer or question the actual people who are around their children at that moment in time. I hope that's all, really literally all that I can say. So anyway, I wanted to read that. I think that's really interesting. I think it points to an interesting aspect of human psychology, which again is just that people will do some really crazy things sometimes to make themselves feel safe, to make themselves feel protected, to make themselves feel like they are on the right side, that they have the correct perspective, that they are following the truth, as it were. And that they will do that, I think, sometimes at all costs, even if it means completely subverting like your own critical thinking to reality. Anything to just feel safe, which I think is really fascinating, and perhaps could provide some insight into why it is there are still so many people in organized religion across the board, Christianity, Catholicism, and all the others around the world, because of course abuses exist everywhere, who continue to participate in systems and organizations that clearly are hurting people. I think it offers some insight into why that happens. So anyway, moving right along, this is an interesting story. This was published April 23rd, and this kind of ties in with a similar story that I read last month that was from somewhere in Latin America. I can't remember off the top of my head which country, but a similar situation with the inheritance of a woman, very wealthy former member of Opus Dei who passed away, and what ended up happening to her funds. TLDR, they did not end up where they were supposed to go, and some of them went missing. So anyway, this is kind of a similar situation, although this is happening in Spain. The headline says, Opus Dei is fighting over an inheritance for which two sisters are accused of fraud in the Palma court. According to the prosecution, the two sisters became the sole beneficiaries of 400,000 euros from their aunt to the detriment of the other heirs, other relatives, and a foundation linked to the hierarchical institution of the church. The prosecution is requesting 7 years in prison and hefty fines for each of the defendants. The woman died in 2019, and in her will, she indicated her wish to give approximately half of her inheritance to a charitable entity, a foundation linked to Opus Dei, and the other half in small percentages to a number of nephews and godchildren of friends, since she had no children. And that sounds pretty standard for what I have read and seen and heard. People, members of Opus Dei, are usually instructed, particularly supernumerary members, are often told to consider Opus Dei as like an additional child that they should like make allowances for in terms of like financial contributions, and then also like lasting wills and testaments and inheritances and that kind of thing. At the time of her last will and testament in 2015, she owned 2 homes and a parking space in Madrid. In late 2010, she granted 2 of her nieces, who are caring for her and are now defendants in the case, broad powers of attorney to manage and dispose of her assets. According to the prosecution, when their aunt was in a nursing home in Madrid, they accompanied her to the notary twice in 2016 to sell her real estate holdings for €839. Taking advantage of the power of attorney she had granted to them, the same year they signed 2 life annuity contracts, 2 policies, with part of the money obtained from the sale of the properties. The prosecution maintains that in 2016 and 17, the 2 sisters, without their aunt's knowledge, allegedly forged her signature and went to a bank in Palma where they signed a beneficiary designation clause in both insurance policies, naming themselves as beneficiaries in the event of death. In this way, they became the sole beneficiaries of €400,000 to the detriment of the other heirs, namely the non-profit foundation linked to Opus Dei and 8 other relatives of the women. So Opus Dei and 8 other people are pissed because they're not getting their money. However, the 2 sisters were unable to access this money, as upon their aunt's death, the bank deposited the amount with the court, questioning the legitimacy of their designation as beneficiaries. Furthermore, in August 2020, a court in Palma seized the €400,000 and a precautionary court ordered the seizure of the €400,000. The prosecution accuses the 2 women of 2 counts of fraud in conjunction with 2 counts of document forgery, for which it seeks sentences of 7 years in prison and 18 months of fines at a rate of €12 per day. Regarding civil liability, the public prosecutor requests that the clauses designating the beneficiaries of the accused in the 2 signed policies be declared null and void, and that the €400,000 be returned to the estate. The charitable organization linked to Opus Dei, a hierarchical institution of the Catholic Church, which is entitled to approximately half of the inheritance, is acting as a private prosecutor. They're mad. And they've been, the case has been transferred between Palma and Madrid. The private prosecution also represents the interests of the other heirs. So they got everybody else on board. They're saying, hey, we're not getting our money and you're not getting your money either. Let's do something about it. The first section of the court held a preliminary hearing yesterday in this case, but no agreement was reached between the parties. The 2 sisters did not accept the charges, so the trial has been scheduled for April 2027. The 2 defendants will testify at the end of the hearing, and the court yesterday ordered the evidence to be presented at the provincial court, where notaries, a tax advisor, and the caregiver of the deceased elderly woman will appear. The two defendants were responsible for the care of their aunt, and once she entered the nursing home, they had to sell their apartments to cover the costs, according to sources close to the case. The aunt of the accused died in September 2019 and made 6 wills between 1993 and 2015, in which she left approximately half of her inheritance to a charitable entity and the other half in small percentages to a series of nephews and godchildren of friends. In her last will and testament, drawn up in February 2015, she named the defendants as her heirs, leaving one of them 2.5% of her assets and her sister another 2.5%. Furthermore, days later, in March 2015, the woman contacted her lawyer and friend and signed a private document bequeathing a solitaire ring to one of her nieces and a mantel clock to the other. At that time, she owned 2 houses and a parking space in Madrid. A few years earlier, in November 2010, she granted these nieces a very broad general power of attorney known as a power of ruin to manage and dispose of her assets. The prosecution alleges that the defendants tried to seize their aunt's assets and remove them from the inheritance. Thus, after the woman entered a nursing home in Madrid, they accompanied her to the notary in January and April of 2016 so that she could sell her real estate holdings for €839. Part of this money was used by her nieces thanks to the power of the ruin they held to take out 2 life annuity policies in 2016 with death benefits of €300,500 and €100,500 respectively, according to the prosecution. Between 2016 and 2017, without their aunt's knowledge or consent, and forging her signature, according to the prosecutor, the 2 sisters went to a bank in Palma on 2 occasions where they signed a clause naming themselves as beneficiaries in the event of their aunt's death on each of the insurance policies. In this way, they became the sole beneficiaries of €400,000 to the detriment of the other heirs. However, this money never reached them because it was deposited with the court and subsequently seized as a precautionary measure. And I have not yet seen anything in the news about what is happening with this case, if there's been a conclusion, if they settled out of court, what exactly has happened. But I wanted to at least alert you to this situation and read this article because it's interesting. It kind of is in line with, in the same theme as another article that I read just a month ago. And both were about extremely wealthy elderly people essentially losing control of their assets, and sometimes because they signed it over, sometimes because they were under like a conservatorship or something like that, and then their like funds and everything that they worked for their entire lives are like basically stolen from them. And this is not uncommon, and it's also not just like an Opus Dei thing. In American pop culture, one of the most famous and well-known cases of this would be Britney Spears and her conservatorship, which started the whole Free Britney movement, which is still ongoing, by the way. A lot of people still do not believe that she is fully free of that conservatorship and all of the conditions that it had her under. So this is not like an uncommon thing, unfortunately. People targeting individuals with a lot of money and trying to take their money because they are greedy grifters and con men, and that is what they do. And it's never okay whenever it happens. It's never okay if you work your entire life and you save and you want to use those savings for something specific at the end of your life, be it given to a charitable entity or to family or whatever the case may be, to light every single bill on fire and like watch it blow away into the wind. That is your prerogative, should be your prerogative, because it's your money that you earned. And this is theft, plain and simple. So anyway, very interesting. I wanted to bring that to your attention. Another article out of Spain. This again follows on the heels of similar articles. I've been following the developments of this for a little while now over in Spain, with efforts to compensate victims of Catholic Church abuse. And this is some good news. It says the green light is given to the office to compensate victims of church abuse starting this Wednesday, and this was published on April 14th. They will be able to request compensation through the electronic portal set up by the Ministry of the Presidency. Starting this Wednesday, victims of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church will be able to use the office for the recognition and reparation of this scourge, which will become operational after the Council of Ministers approved its creation this Tuesday. According to the protocol signed on March 30th by the Spanish government, the Spanish Episcopal Conference, CEE, and Spanish Confederation of Religious, and the Ombudsman, who oversees the model this pioneering mechanism contemplates symbolic reparations and economic compensation from the Catholic Church with no limit on the compensation for victims of cases that have expired. At the press conference following Tuesday's cabinet meeting, the Minister of the Presidency, Justice, and Relations with the Cortes, Felix Bolaños, reminded attendees that this mechanism will be in effect for 1 year, renewable for a second, and announced an information campaign in collaboration with all abuse victims associations in Spain so that they can easily learn about the procedures for accessing this new model. He also emphasized that the objective is to provide redress to all those who undoubtedly suffered abuse and who cannot go to court because the statute of limitations has expired or the perpetrator is deceased, and that this is their only avenue for redress. Quote, "I believe we are doing justice, and it is now very positive that all the victims of these abuses know what the procedure is and can make it effective starting tomorrow," Bolaños emphasized, noting that victims who have already resorted to the reparation system created by the Church in 2024, which is called Pereda, will be able to use the new mixed mechanism. From this Wednesday, April 15, the new office attached to the Ministry of the Presidency, Justice, and Relations within the court will receive requests for reparation through its electronic headquarters and will offer guidance to victims via email and by telephone. And there are some contacts here if you are in Spain and you or someone you know wants to take advantage of this. The applications received will be forwarded to the Ombudsman's Victims Unit and made up of independent specialists and professionals who will draw up the proposed reparations. If the parties accept it, it will be final and the Church will be obligated to comply. If no agreement is reached, a joint commission with the participation of victims' associations will try to reach a solution by consensus, and if this is not possible, the Ombudsman has the final say, and it is the Catholic Church that will respond financially or with any reparation that the process may give rise to, Bolaños asserted. When asked if the government is considering any measures should the Church fail to pay these compensations, Bolaños assured that there is a comfortable safety net to ensure the Church compensates the victims. Quote, "The Church will pay. First, because it is willing to do so. Second, because we have reached an agreement that stipulates it. Third, because the diocese or religious congregations will pay. And fourth, if the diocese or specific religious congregations lack the funds, the Episcopal Conference and the Conference of Religious are ultimately responsible," he concluded. So this is a broad collaborative effort. I'm sorry, I think I keep bumping my mic. This is a broad collaborative effort that is coming together after months and months and months and months and months of negotiations and back and forths. And I think that it is good that there is so much multi-collaboration because I think that there has to be. This issue is too big for any one single entity to handle by itself. I mean, clearly, the Catholic Church has not been up to the task, really, in any of the countries where it operates. And it is good to see that the Spanish Catholic Church is taking these steps and is in what appears to be lockstep with their government. I think it's good. Quote, "It is their will. They want to repair that damage, to do justice for those victims who for decades were forgotten, humiliated, marginalized, whose pain was sometimes even greater than the abuse itself, and now the Church is committed thanks to the agreement that this government has reached with them," the minister emphasized. The protocol details that the reparation may be symbolic or restorative, aimed at institutional recognition and the offering of tools for support or the request for apologies, and also economic for the damage caused and for the expenses recorded in the treatment of possible physical and psychological consequences. So this is good news, and I hope that victims in Spain are made fully aware of this, equipped with all of the information that they need to make use of it, and that it does begin to help some people because it is so needed. In the vein of good news, reparations, compensations, this is from bishopaccountability.org. Of course, they kind of just collect articles from all over the place. So this was originally published on Agence France Press out of Paris, France on April 2nd. But I like their format. It's very clean and simple, so I'm going to read what they have here. So the headline says, "Vatican to compensate victims of abusive Peru Catholic group." And this is referring to the now defunct Sodality of Christian Life, or the Sodalitium Christianae Vitae, which was a Peruvian Catholic society that Pope Francis suppressed before he passed away. And he suppressed it because, amongst many other things, come to find out, it was a very abusive organization, a very abusive leadership within the organization, and a lot of people were hurt. And as things things have sort of been unfolding as everything's been shaking out since this organization was suspended, one of the biggest outstanding questions in my mind and in the minds of anyone who's been following this situation with the SCV has been, what will happen for the victims? When are the victims of this organization going to be compensated in some meaningful way? Because it needs to happen. It's not enough for things to just get shut down, for people to be told to like get on with their lives. There's victims that have to be taken care of. And apparently now there has been a development. So this says the Vatican has announced plans to compensate victims of a Peru-based Catholic movement, which was dissolved last year following revelations of rampant sexual and psychological abuse by some of its leaders. Pope Francis ordered the closure of the ultra-conservative Sodalitium Christianae Vitae, SCV, a week before his death after a 7-year Vatican investigation. The lay order acknowledged that its founder, Luis Fernando Fugari, and other leaders of the movement sexually and psychologically abused at least 19 minors and 10 adults between 1975 and 2002. The investigation also revealed financial mismanagement. The Vatican said Wednesday it would set up a listening channel in Lima in May for the victims in order to hear their complaints and requests for compensation. The church will use assets seized from SCV to compensate the victims. For those who have directly suffered abuse, this announcement opens a real opportunity to continue moving forward towards just reparations, the Peruvian Bishops' Conference said in a press release. Fugari, a Peruvian national, founded the SCV in 1971 with the aim of transforming teenagers into soldiers of Christ. Very church militant vibes. He currently lives in Rome. He has not returned to Peru since the investigations against him began in 2015. Peruvian authorities dropped the investigation in 2024. Robert Prevost, who would later become Pope Leo, served for years in Peru. As a trusted bishop under Francis, he supported SCV victims in their claims, according to the victims' accounts. So they are going to be setting up this listening channel. Clearly, this is not as good as like proof positive bank statements showing like financial compensation or redress schemes that specifically deal with getting people in touch with like mental health counseling and things like that should they need it. It's really like it's only the most initial, yeah, we're going to be setting this up, which is frustrating and annoying because I feel like it should have happened by now. But it's happening at a glacial pace. It's happening, and so I wanted to make note of it. And with that said, that brings us to the end of the news articles for this newsroom. But before we close out, there are a few obits that I want to mention because there were people who passed away, and I get their obits in my inbox along with all of these other news headlines because if they are a member of this organization and it gets mentioned in the obituary, then I'm going to see it. And I think it's important to take a moment to honor our dead and to remember those who have passed, even if we don't necessarily support everything that they did with their lives or maybe don't love the way that they chose to spend their time. A life lived is a life lived, and I think it's important to honor that. So first and foremost, we have Florence M. Roth, 95, of Urbandale, Iowa, passed away peacefully on April 26, 2026. Devoted to her family and with a deep commitment to her Catholic faith, she did her best to live her life in service. And scrolling through, she became involved in many communities and church organizations, including, let's see, St. Pius, Rosary Society, House of Mercy Foundation, Catholic Daughters of America, the Sierra Club, St. Pius X, the St. Pius X School. She was loved by all. And I'm wondering, did it say something in here about, let's see, either Opus Dei, Legion, SCV, or I'm not exactly sure which organization that I have in my like inbox triggered this obit, but regardless, eternal rest grant unto her. Next, we have Father Fernando Valenciano, who is the oldest member of Opus Dei in the world. He passed at the age of 103 on April 21st. Next, we have James Albert Welsh, who grew up in Germany and passed, let's see, does it say the day? 2020, just that he's survived by his nieces and nephews. I don't see like a specific date of death here. But the reason why I thought this was interesting, and the reason this particular obit stood out to me, is because he was involved in the Miles Christi Order, which is a very, very small Catholic organization, similar to Miles Jesu, which is another Catholic organization. I interviewed a former member of Miles Jesu last year. Really interesting conversation with a guy named David who went all over, including to Rome, as a member of this organization. And I very rarely, if ever, see Miles Christi mentioned in the news in any way, shape, or form. So that stood out to me. I have the news alert set up, but like they just don't come up very much. And I haven't done a ton of research into the organization. At some point, I would like to do like a deep dive just to kind of see what it's about and its like history and everything, because it's been on my radar for a while for a reason. And he was involved. James Albert Welsh was involved with Miles Christi. Next, Janet M. Dillon passed at the age of 94 from Detroit, Michigan. Fernando Valenciano, I think I just read, this is a duplicate for this page back here, the oldest living member of Opus Dei. And he requested admission to the prelature in December 1939. So remember, Opus Dei was founded in 1928. So early days he was around. And he passed away. He was the longest serving member of Opus Dei. So eternal rest grant unto them, and let perpetual light shine upon them. I always want to make a point to note these names because I see them when I'm going through my news headlines. So last but not least, I wanted to leave you with an action item if you're at all interested, something that you can go sign up to attend. I already signed up. I'm hoping I won't be a bit too busy this day and I'll be able to listen in. So this is a multi-part political education series challenging the Christian right, riffs, and strategies. This page was published April 28th. And they say, the Christian right is far from monolithic. In this multi-part political education series, we aim to advance our understanding of the Christian right, its weaknesses more than its strengths. We highlight contemporary movement fractures, particularly between and among Christian nationalists, the New Apostolic Reformation, Christian Restructionism, and conservative Catholicism, and evaluate how opposing groups are strategically responding and identify what strategic interventions are missing. So part one will be on May 14th. They will be joined by Reverend Naomi Washington Leaphart, a Black queer daughter of Detroit, a minister, professor, and movement strategist. There's also Gareth Gore, obviously author of Opus, investigative journalist. He is going to be speaking. Julia Ingersoll is a professor of religious studies at the University of North Florida and a faculty fellow at the Florida Blue Center for Ethics. She's written books. Rachel Tabachnik, as a researcher, Frederick Clarkson. So they've got some really interesting people. He's a senior research analyst at Political Research Associates. They got some interesting people who are going to be talking about the Christian right, understanding it. And I am not sure if this is going to be like a purely like Western-centric conversation, a purely North American conversation, just because this country is really going through it right now as far as like Christian nationalism is concerned. But if you're interested in learning more about that, you can find this, the link for this page, the link to RSVP, sign up, along with a link for all of the other articles that I discussed today in a source document linked in the description down below. Like I said, I already signed up. I'm hoping that I won't be too busy that day and that I can listen in. I think it'll be a really interesting conversation, and I wanted to mention it in case there's anyone listening who is interested in starting to learn some more, self-educate. It's always what I am trying to promote here, right? I want to encourage you to like do your own research and ask your own questions. And if I am like a launch pad for all of that, then all the better. And I thought this would be a good thing to mention since it is right around the corner and a great way for you to get some more education potentially if you want to. So with all of that said, that is the state of affairs for these articles for the month of April. there were some interesting ones. Please let me know what you think down below. Which article stands out the most to you? What did you find the most interesting and why? I just think we're living through such fascinating times. It's a wild time to be like paying attention to the global conversation, particularly in regard to like religion and everything. It's a very interesting time to be alive. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you got something out of it. If you found it helpful, transformational, or you enjoyed it, please, like I said, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and maybe share this episode with somebody that you know. Encourage those around you to become better informed and more critical thinkers too. I think that if we can all do that, when we can maybe turn the tide on the like anti-intellectualism that is like washing over us right now at every turn. So thank you so much for being with me here today. I have more content that will be coming out in the days and weeks ahead. Some things that came on my radar that I did not know about until I sat down to start organizing all of this, and some things that I wanted to save for their own standalone video. So subscribe so you don't miss it, and I hope that I will see you for that next video whenever that comes. And in the meantime, like I always say, remember, and I have it on my wall now, although it might be reversed and backwards for you, but nolite te bastardes carborundorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down.